Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So if the Greeks want to take this struggle further, you would need to have, well, certainly options in case the euro does break up, which, again, I don't think is the preferred option in the sense of a chaotic breakup forced by a bunch of hedge fund hyenas. But if it comes to that, what do you do then? Well, then if you're back to the drachma, then you want to impose heavy-duty exchange controls and capital controls. You want to slap on a protective tariff, at least in some sectors. You want to impose a Tobin tax on derivatives. You want to re-regulate the financial markets according to New Deal criteria. And you also then want to seize the central bank of Greece. The Bank of Greece gets seized, and you force them to issue 0% credit for production. And you use that to revive shipbuilding and some other industries, as well as the usual agriculture, and of course some tourism in a place like this is also perfectly reasonable. But mainly, you've got to get some hard commodity capital goods production going. You've got to pick an area where you can become the world leader in something, some high-tech, high-value-added, energy-intensive area. You've got to start finding an area of supremacy, and that would be the way for Greece. So it would be a good idea for Greece to say, listen, you hedge fund guys, if you drive us out of the euro, here's what we're going to do, and that will become an example for the world in the way that the rebellion of Ypsilanti back in the 1820s, when Lord Byron got into the act, that will become a marker in the same way that Iceland and some other countries have been, to struggle against the bankers. Now, we can't do justice to this topic right now, but let's just mention it. The question of the collapse of empire and where the U.S. Stands in this regard. Do take a look at Russia Today. The crosstalk on last Monday was yours truly, along with a couple of British think tank experts and Peter Lavelle, on the question of, are we dealing with Soviet America? And we also want to pay attention to the debate which has been detonated by Niall Ferguson, the British neocon reactionary Niall Ferguson, professor at Oxford and Harvard, and generally very nasty oligarch, has put out an article in Foreign Affairs about, will the U.S. collapse be quick or slow? And he's saying it might actually be very quick. And I wonder whether Niall Ferguson, in the same way we see that when Soros wants to do an operation, he always has a theory to back it up. Niall Ferguson may be now the Geschichtsfletcherei, the theory monger for some hedge fund cabal that is trying to do a massive bear raid against the dollar not too far down the road. And, of course, this is not good stuff, right? The decline or weakness of the dollar is a fact. But then the conspirators piling on, that's another story. And we want to defend Greece and Spain and Portugal. We also don't want the hedge funds to attack the United States. General problem is either the hedge funds and the zombie banks will destroy the credit of national states and drive national states into bankruptcy. And in that case, you get the collapse of civilization. Or the national states will put the hedge funds and zombie banks into receivership because they're all bankrupt and they're all living basically off the federal budget of the different countries. Either the hedge funds wipe out the national states or the national states wipe out the zombie banks and the hedge funds. And I am for the second alternative because that allows human civilization to continue. And if the only idea you got in your head is anti-government, you're gravitating towards the first camp. You're becoming a dupe and useful idiot of the hedge funds and the zombie banks. So think about that. Where do you stand in relation to that Park Avenue clique that's attacking Greece? Because they're making no secret of it. They say after Greece, today Greece, tomorrow the world, we'll be coming after Spain and then Italy and then California and then the U.S. and then, of course, the British, who are getting slammed even in the process because the British pound, of course, is just as weak and even weaker than Greece. Here's the issue with Niall Ferguson. The British theories of the fall of empire all come down to this one rather threadbare concept of imperial overstretch. This was put forward by Paul Kennedy about 20 years ago, the decline of the great powers. This is a guy who did research work really on Germany and Britain and their rivalry before 1914. not very illuminating in terms of British motivation, but certainly a massive empirical material to be sure. The problem is that imperial overstretch won't do it. If you talk to British experts about the fall of the United States, they'll say, well, it's the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, and the role of the British of the military-industrial complex. But wait a minute. It's Wall Street and banking oligarchy. The industrial military complex is owned by Wall Street in just the same way that everything else is. And the operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, insane and reprehensible, deplorable though they are, would not be enough to bring down a healthy economy. It is the fact that you've got a deindustrialized economy that is letting this take on the proportions that we see. The purpose of the imperial overstretch is you don't have to talk about sociology, you don't have to talk about oligarchy, you don't have to talk about deindustrialization. And indeed, these are the real causes. And we can go back to the Han Empire in China. We will see that oligarchy, the growth of latifundia, debt slavery, peasantry being reduced to serfdom and then to slavery, centers of power so large that they began to compete with the central government. That was the destruction of the Han after the failure of the reforms of Wang Mang around the year 1, during the life of Christ. There was a reforming emperor who had taken over in China. He tried to reform the Han Empire and didn't quite succeed, and then was eliminated. Similar thing in Rome with the Gracchi, right? Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus around 125 BC after the Punic Wars. The question was, would you have gang slavery, large-scale agricultural slave plantations that would destroy the individual Roman family farmer? In both cases, the Chinese family farmer, the Roman family farmer, both destroyed. This leads to military weakness, and then it leads to the collapse of your empire. You're defeated by barbarians that you could have dealt with very easily 1 or 2 centuries before. And we can also look at the French Ancien Régime, where we had a whole aristocracy that demanded that they not be taxed in the same way that Wall Street today demands that they not be taxed. Goldman Sachs' effective rate, 1% to 3% of taxation. And again, we would, if we got the Tobin tax on there, that would shoot up to a level that's much more like what the rest of us are paying. Similarly, in Spain, the idea that you could get wealth off the Peruvian treasure fleets and not develop your own textile industry leads to the destruction of Spain through repeated bankruptcies. But basically, if you want to put a headstone for the USSR, and if you're ordering a headstone for the U.S., it's died of oligarchy, died of financier supremacy, died of the SDI of speculation, deindustrialization, and immiseration. Now, Niall Ferguson discusses these things in Foreign Affairs. This is a very superficial piece, I think, with sinister intent. The Soviets, in particular, would have needed to take their relatively successful state planning, the Gosplan, and make that into indicative planning. In other words, not down to the last bolt, but lists of national priorities. The Soviets would have needed to provide 0% credit for small and medium industry of the type of small companies built around machine tools, built around scientific discoveries, technological innovations that would have allowed them to take the spin-offs from their military economy and turn that into profitable, high-capital, high-tech civilian production. Of course, because of Marxist ideology, they couldn't do that. Above all, infrastructure, right? Stalin's 5-year plan was very heavy on heavy industry for war purposes, but very, very poor in terms of infrastructure. And this then became the Moscow phone system and the lack of railroads and the lack of roads and general underdevelopment, which is only now really being addressed. So that would have been the way out for the Soviets. For the United States today, it's the 5-point program. You've got to take measures to smash speculation. You've got to seize the Fed, 0% credit for production, launch a huge program of infrastructure plus your 3 science drivers. You've got to maintain your social safety net in the meantime, and then you've got to get a new world monetary system. Check out those 5 points on Tarpley.net. But don't be led down the garden path by Niall Ferguson or indeed by Paul Kennedy, and we'll be back next week.